I pressed the record button. The small red light glowed steadily, and I knew I was about to speak words I had never said aloud before. My hand trembled for just an instant, but I steadied it by reminding myself that this was necessary, an act of clarity. My voice might crack, I accept that, but I will not stop. I must have a record of the truth, even if no one else ever listens to this tape. I remember a time not so long ago, an image so vivid in my mind it might as well be happening right now. It was an early morning in our living room. Sunlight fell through the blinds in thin stripes across the coffee table. Evelyn was barefoot, wearing an old t-shirt of mine that looked oversized on her. She had come from the kitchen holding 2 mugs of coffee. I can still see her smile. Soft, almost shy, as though the day had no edges, no corners, just a slow and gentle beginning. I had reached out to take my mug, and in that brief moment, her wrist brushing mine, the warmth of her skin, there was something so precious, so intimate. That memory, once the color of gentle gold, is now stained with the rancid taste of betrayal. It's almost as if I can't look at it without feeling my stomach twist. And so, here I am, 38 years old, telling this story into a recorder, my voice echoing off the walls of an empty house. I can't quite call it home anymore. I have lost the sense that it is a place of safety or love. Now it feels more like a shell, a stage where illusions once played out. If you're listening to this, you should know I never wanted to see what I saw. I never wanted to feel the things I felt. But life doesn't care about what we want. It started with small shifts. She would say, "Don't touch me," with no anger, no passion, just the mechanical motion of pushing me away, like I was nothing but a passing gust of wind. She would eat her dinner in silence, eyes drifting to some fixed point on the wall. At night, she turned away in bed, as though my presence was a minor inconvenience. I told myself it was stress, or that she might be going through a private sadness. I told myself I should be patient. I began noticing objects in odd places. The photo of us in a wooden frame, turned to face the wall. That photo had once sat proudly by the bookshelf, our arms wrapped around each other in a park in Portland, my hometown. It was a picture of 2 people who believed in each other. Now it stood reversed, its face hidden, as though even the memory was too much for her. And still I hoped. I believed, or rather, I forced myself to believe that we could be fixed. Evelyn is not a cruel person by nature. She's refined, educated in the arts, a woman who sees beauty in architecture and paintings. She's graceful, elegant, with a quiet confidence. She'd always been the dreamer in our marriage, while I was the practical one. But perhaps in that dreaming, she realized something. Something that took her beyond the walls of our shared life. My father used to say, "Don't look for reasons in a broken heart. It cracks without logic." I didn't want him to be right. I was raised to keep my composure. In my childhood home, tears weren't exactly forbidden, but let's say they weren't encouraged. So I learned to hold the sorrow in my chest and let it settle there until it hardened into a calm mask. It's what I did the evening I found out. Let me be precise. One night, she came home past midnight. No calls, no texts. I asked if everything was okay. She gave me a look that was both distant and bored, as though my worry was a trivial matter. She went straight to the bedroom, took a quick shower, and lay on her side of the bed with her back to me. I listened to her breathing, waiting for any sign, an explanation, a spark of anger, or even regret. But all I heard was emptiness. I started noticing patterns. The nights out became more frequent. The silences grew longer. Occasionally, she'd leave for work dressed in a way that made me think, she's not doing that for me. A side of her was blossoming in secret, so I found myself trailing behind her, quietly, carefully, like a man who's not sure he wants the truth, yet can't stop himself from opening the door. I followed her to a downtown gallery one afternoon, claiming I had a meeting nearby. She was supposed to be finalizing some new exhibit, but I watched from a distance as she greeted a man with a handshake that lingered too long. He looked younger, or maybe it was just his energy. He had that easy confidence I recognized in men who believe the world is their playground. He kissed her cheek, and she smiled in a way I hadn't seen in months. I stood there, across the street, hands in my pockets, heart hammering a dull beat inside my ribs. I told myself maybe it was innocent. I'm not a jealous man by default, but that moment took something out of me. I could have confronted her then, but I didn't. Instead, I went home and sat quietly in the dark. I tried to come up with a plan or an explanation. I went to bed without calling her. She came in later that night, an hour past midnight. The door creaked. She didn't turn on the lights. I heard her slip off her shoes in the hall. She got under the covers, and I could smell a faint fragrance I didn't recognize. Something sweet and musky. Not mine. Not ours. I didn't react. I didn't raise my voice. I stayed still, listening to her breathing. Eventually, she fell asleep. I stared at the darkness, imagining the edges of her silhouette. A hollow ache spread through me. It wasn't that I wanted to weep. It was that I couldn't. A man can forget how to cry if he's gone too long pretending he's invulnerable. From that night forward, I watched. I noted details. I noticed how certain text messages made her face light up with a brief flicker of excitement. I watched how quickly she typed back. I saw her linger in front of the mirror, fussing with her hair, biting her lip in thought. And I learned that on Thursday evenings, she stopped by a particular cafe on the other side of town, an area she rarely ventured into before. I found out she had canceled certain gallery meetings at the last minute without telling me. I got my confirmation on a Friday. I left the office early, telling my assistant I had a personal emergency. My colleagues might have suspected something. I'm usually quite composed, methodical in everything I do, but I hardly cared at that point. I drove to that cafe, parked across the street, and waited. I think the waiting was worse than any confrontation could have been. My chest was tight, my palms slick with sweat. I kept checking the rearview mirror as though expecting to see some reflection of my old life vanish behind me. Then she arrived, stepping out of her car. Immediately, that same man joined her at the entrance. They exchanged a look. The look lovers give each other when they think they are safe, alone, or unobserved. He brushed his hand against her waist, then let it linger. They went inside. I sat there for 10, maybe 15 minutes, then followed. I didn't know what I was doing, only that I had to see it with my own eyes. I ordered a black coffee, sat a few tables away, behind a pillar. I had no appetite, no sense of taste, and my heart felt like an iron weight behind my ribs. They talked, leaning in close. She rested her hand on his at one point, and I saw her lips curl into that private smile, the same one that used to be just for me. For a split second, I remembered that morning with the coffee cups in our living room. The memory felt like an open wound. I forced myself to stay. They left together. I followed them to a small boutique hotel a few blocks away. It was an older building, with worn brick and a neon sign flickering in the twilight. She paused in the lobby, glanced around. I froze behind a pillar again, heart pounding. Then they took the elevator to the 4th floor. I waited in the lobby for almost half an hour, telling myself maybe they had a business meeting in a private lounge, or maybe this was just a short visit. But I knew better. Eventually, I mustered the nerve to take the elevator up, step by step, as though walking into a nightmare. The hallway was quiet, plush carpeting, a faint smell of cleaning supplies. Doors lined both sides. Then I heard something, muffled behind a door, soft laughter, a low murmur. And suddenly, a sound that cut me like a blade. I realized it was her voice in a breathy moan that I can't unhear. My head felt light, as if my body were floating outside itself. I raised my hand, wanting to knock, wanting to fling the door open. But I just stood there, my palm trembling in midair. I can't recall how long I stood, listening to the rustle of sheets, the creak of the bed, and her hushed gasps. There was no mistaking the intimacy. My throat constricted, and my eyes burned. But no tears came. Men aren't supposed to cry, right? My father's voice echoed in my mind. "Hold it together, Jake. Don't you dare let them see you weaken." So I swallowed, let out a slow breath, and walked back down the hallway. I returned to my car, sat behind the steering wheel for an hour, staring at nothing. That was the day the last illusions died. I didn't speak of it to her. She came home later that night, or early the next morning. It was 2 or 3 a.m. I was sitting in the dark again, in the living room. She crossed it without a word, not even glancing at me. I watched her silhouette pass by, aware of every tiny motion. How she loosened the scarf around her neck. How she ran her fingers through her hair. She shut the bedroom door behind her. The distant echo of the shower started. My chest felt numb. My mind drifted to that hallway in the hotel. Her voice, that moan. I closed my eyes and saw her body pressed against his. And still, I didn't speak. I let the silence devour us both. That night, I discovered something new in me. An emptiness that grew deeper each hour. It wasn't just rage. It wasn't the urge to scream or smash something. No, it was a cold, hollow place inside me, a kind of infinite well. And I dropped into it without a sound. I went through the motions of my life. I continued to manage my sales team, gave presentations, closed deals. My coworkers would say, "Jake, you look tired." And I'd laugh politely, blame it on too many late nights at the office. Meanwhile, in my head, I was replaying those noises from behind that hotel door, that final confirmation. Strangely, I wasn't searching for a way to fix it. I was searching for a place to put my anger, my betrayal, my sense of humiliation. I started doing things I never imagined I would. I entertained ideas of retribution, not in a dramatic outburst, but meticulously, like planning a project at work. I wanted her to feel the extent of my pain. And I found myself thinking, if she can do it, so can I. Even though we have no children, we had built a life together for over a decade. And now, all of it seemed worthless. Something had snapped inside me. In that time, I began frequenting places after work I'd normally avoid. Bars where the music was loud, the lights dim. I'd sit alone, nursing a drink, scanning the crowd. There were women there, lonely or looking for an escape. I felt nothing but the desire to prove something to myself. Eventually, I let one of those nights spiral. I left with a woman who barely knew my name, and I made sure to leave traces for Evelyn to find. I'm not proud of that, but I did it. She never confronted me about it. Sometimes I'd see her glance at my phone, or notice a faint scent of perfume on my shirt that wasn't hers. But if she suspected, she didn't show it. She maintained her icy distance, as though my existence was an unremarkable detail in the background. And I realized that was how deep her indifference ran. Still, I planned something bigger, something that would force her to look at me. Because the worst thing isn't hatred, it's being invisible. So I reached out to an old friend of mine from college, a woman named Trisha who works in event planning. She was single, outspoken, and I suspected she'd be open to a no-strings arrangement. We had a polite history, some mild flirtations in the past, but never anything serious. I called her one evening, told her I needed a companion for a work function, someone who wouldn't mind playing along. She laughed, teased me, but agreed. That weekend, Evelyn announced another gallery event. I told her I'd be out with clients. There was no argument. She barely nodded, busy scrolling on her phone. I left before she did, my heart hammering with a strange mix of adrenaline and shame. I met Trisha at a downtown restaurant, somewhere Evelyn might accidentally see us if she was paying attention. We chatted, drank wine, talked about mundane things, and eventually ended up leaving together. I made no effort to hide my intentions. I wanted Evelyn to see or hear about it. A petty trick, but then again, I was a desperate man. I had parked near the same cafe where Evelyn met her lover. I recall a moment when Trisha leaned in to kiss me under a street lamp. Her lips tasted of cherry lip gloss and white wine. I let it happen, eyes open, scanning the crowd as though hoping Evelyn would walk by. Pathetic, perhaps, But I was beyond caring about pride. I was consumed by the need to show her how it felt to be replaced. And in that second, I realized the satisfaction was fleeting. An empty triumph at best. Days turned into weeks, and I sank deeper into this twisted existence. I would see Evelyn slip away, presumably to meet him. I'd answer texts from Tricia, or from other women I'd met in bars. I was juggling illusions upon illusions, not to find happiness, but to punish someone who never even cared to notice. The cracks in my conscience widened. I started losing my sense of self-respect. Everything I did felt like a hollow imitation of revenge. Then one night, Evelyn came home earlier than usual. It was late, maybe 11 p.m., but typically she'd return closer to 2 a.m. I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking a glass of whiskey. She walked in quietly, and for once, she paused in the doorway, looking at me. It wasn't a tender look, nor was it angry. It was just observant, as though she finally saw me there. I braced for words, accusations, maybe a confession. But she said nothing. She set her bag down on the counter, poured herself a glass of water, and stood across from me. My heart pounded. I wanted to ask, "Where were you? Who were you with? Are you satisfied now?" But I couldn't speak. She sipped her water, then looked at the turned-around photo on the nearby shelf. And I watched her as she noticed how the frame was cracked, the glass chipped at one corner, something I'd done in a moment of drunken frustration. Her eyes flicked back to me, but still she said nothing. She moved to the bedroom, leaving me there alone. I stared at the empty hallway, listening to her footsteps recede. In that moment, I understood that this marriage was a ghost. We were two separate orbits that no longer intersected. And maybe we'd never truly see each other again. All those nights, all those silent drives, the bitterness, the secrecy, it was poisoning me from the inside out. And I needed something final. Something that would break this stalemate of indifference. A part of me wanted to corner her, shout questions until she gave me an honest answer. But I also knew the man she was seeing. His name, as I'd discovered, was Marco. A flashy, talented architect. Young, energetic, the exact opposite of what I'd become. I found his social media, saw pictures of him smiling at construction sites or leaning against a balcony railing with the city skyline behind him, wearing a confident grin. The kind of grin that says, "I can have whatever I want. I'm not the type to hire a private investigator or anything so dramatic." Instead, I quietly gathered more facts. Found out which nights he worked late, which nights he taught a class at some community college extension program about architectural design. I realized that his schedule fit neatly with the times Evelyn slipped away. They'd planned it so they could meet discreetly. By this point, I wasn't even shocked. I felt more like a forensic examiner, piecing together clues of a crime scene. Then the opportunity came. A colleague of mine invited me to a weekend retreat for corporate networking, about 2 hours outside the city. I decided to use that retreat as an alibi. Meanwhile, I laid the groundwork for what I intended to do back home. If Evelyn wanted to vanish for a night with Marco, she'd have the perfect chance, thinking I was out of town. I told her, in passing, "I'll be gone Friday through Sunday," without elaboration. She barely nodded. On Friday evening, I drove a rental car out of the city. I checked in briefly at the resort, shook a few hands, made sure people saw me. Then I slipped away, drove back under cover of darkness. Returning to the silent streets of our suburb around 1 a.m., I parked a block away. Made my way home on foot, noticing how still the neighborhood was. A single street lamp flickered at the corner. I let myself in quietly, turning the key in the lock with practiced caution. The house was dark, except for a soft light seeping from under the bedroom door. My heart pounded with a strange mix of dread and certainty. I paused in the foyer, listening. Low voices, a soft laugh. Marco's laugh. My jaw tightened. I'd never heard him in my house before, but I recognized the timbre of his voice from that cafe, from the hallway in the hotel. I crept closer, each step a test of my resolve. The bedroom door was ajar. I glimpsed a part of Evelyn's silhouette, a slender figure, bare shoulders illuminated by the lamp on the nightstand. Marco's form moved behind her, his hands around her waist. The bed creaked softly as they shifted. My lungs seemed to stop working. My mouth felt dry. A wave of cold swept through my veins as I took in the sight. There was an erotic charge in the air. Her hair, slightly damp from a recent shower. The sheets rumpled, their bodies glistening with the afterglow of something intimate. I saw her tilt her head back as his mouth moved along her neck. I had to swallow hard to keep down a surge of raw emotion. I kept telling myself, stay calm. You knew this was coming. You planned for this. My father's voice again, echoing from the recesses of memory. A man doesn't crumble. He stands up, deals with it. So I did. I pushed the door open wider. They froze in unison, heads turning to me. Evelyn's eyes locked on mine, wide. Marco sprang up, hands scrambling to grab a sheet, shock plastered across his features. I stepped into the room, letting the door swing open behind me. My pulse roared in my ears, but outwardly I tried to appear composed, methodical, like a surgeon preparing for a delicate procedure. Evelyn's lips parted as though to speak, but no words came out. The air felt charged with the weight of what was happening. I stared at them for a full 5 seconds, maybe more. Then I took a breath. My voice came out steady, quieter than I expected. I know, I said. I've known for a while. He stammered something, apologies or confusion. I couldn't tell. I kept my gaze on her. A flicker of something passed across her face. Fear, guilt, or maybe just the shock of being caught. But she stayed silent. I let him gather his clothes, never looking away from Evelyn. He slipped out of the bedroom, muttering incoherent excuses. I heard him fumble in the hallway, retrieving shoes, cursing under his breath. Then the front door opened and closed. It was just the two of us left in that room. Husband and wife. The overhead light buzzed faintly. She clutched the sheet to her chest, her knuckles white. But she didn't cover her face, didn't try to run. Slowly, she slipped off the bed, standing on the opposite side, still holding the sheet around her. I could see the shape of her collarbone, a reflection of the lamp's glow on her skin. There was something fragile in the way she stood, as if a sudden gust might blow her over. But her eyes, dark and guarded, refused to drop. I exhaled. It felt like releasing a boulder from my chest. I could feel a tremor in my arms, but I kept my voice low. All this time, I said, and stopped. What else was there to say? She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me. My throat clenched around unspoken fury. I wanted to ask her 1,000 questions. Why him? Why in our house? Why so brazen? But I realized none of her answers would change what I'd seen or what I'd become in the process. Something inside me snapped into a cold clarity. This was the moment to do what I planned. I turned and walked down the hallway. She followed, steps cautious behind me. We reached the living room, where I had left a small array of items carefully arranged. There were pictures of us, our wedding photo, a few snapshots from trips, from holidays, all turned face down on the coffee table. Along with them was a single piece of paper, folded neatly. I picked up that piece of paper, unfolded it, and held it out for her. Divorce agreement, I said, my voice growing thick at the edges. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me. Even then, she remained silent. And that silence tore me apart more than any shouted argument could have. I forced my hand forward, pressing the paper into her grasp. She took it. For a moment, we just stood there. I realized my breath was coming in ragged heaves. The well of my emptiness threatened to overflow, and I fought to maintain composure. She looked at the papers in her hand. I watched her lips tremble, but no sound escaped. I turned away and walked to the corner of the room, where I had placed a suitcase. My suitcase, half-packed. It contained only the essentials, enough clothes for a few days, toiletries, some files from work. I bent down, zipped it up. Then I straightened, rolling my shoulders back. That calm, surgical detachment returned to my face. I looked at her again. She stood motionless, the folded papers clutched to her chest, still wrapped in that bedsheet. A silent figure in a tableau of shattered vows. She tried to take a step toward me, just one, but her feet seemed unwilling. Or maybe her mind was. I walked past her without meeting her eyes, making my way to the front door. The house felt stifling, the walls too close, as though the ghosts of our memories were pressing in on me. I paused at the threshold, hearing the faint rustle of the sheet as she shifted her weight. My chest felt tight, my pulse hammering in my ears. I opened the door. A wave of cool night air hit me. Then I heard a noise from her, a soft, strangled exhalation, like she was trying to speak. I glanced over my shoulder. Our gazes met for an instant. It struck me that I had never seen her look so lost. Part of me wanted to say something, to show some final gesture of kindness, or at least an acknowledgement of our years together. But I found no words, only a grim sense of finality. I stepped outside and had shut the door behind me. The sound of it closing was like a punch to the gut. I stood there for a moment on the porch, gripping the handle of my suitcase. My voice, ironically, felt like it needed to scream, but my upbringing and my resolve kept me silent. I walked to my car, loaded the suitcase, and drove off into the night. Streetlights blurred into lines of amber and white as I turned corners, merging onto the highway. I had no clear destination, just an intention to get away. For hours, I drove aimlessly, the city receding into the distance. Sometime before dawn, I pulled over at a roadside motel, an anonymous little place with a flickering neon sign. I took a room, ignoring the curious glance from the night manager. Inside, I tossed my suitcase onto the bed and collapsed into the single rickety chair. The silence weighed on me. My phone buzzed once. I looked at the screen. A text from a coworker, but nothing from her. That emptiness felt deeper than any well I'd known. I don't remember when I finally fell asleep, but the sun was rising when I awoke. My head throbbed with a dull ache. I stared at the stained ceiling for a while, letting the morning light seep into the musty room. Then I checked my phone again. Still nothing from her. I told myself it didn't matter. Over the next few days, I drifted in and out of that motel, making sporadic calls for work. Nobody pressed me too hard for my absence. I think they assumed I was on the corporate retreat or had some personal crisis. Meanwhile, I thought about the final steps of what I had set in motion. The divorce agreement was mostly symbolic. We still had to face lawyers, separate our finances, decide what to do with the house. But the real blow was done. She knew that I knew. There was no going back. I wanted to twist the knife further, to ensure she felt the same suffocating hopelessness I had felt for weeks, months. But that emptiness in me kept whispering that none of it truly mattered, because once trust is gone, love follows it into the grave. And I realized I didn't care about her shame. I cared about my own sense of betrayal, which was so colossal it dwarfed everything else. Still, the petty side of me demanded more. So I returned to the city and orchestrated a small, cold revenge. I leaked details about her affair to mutual acquaintances. Discreetly, of course. An offhand comment about her new architect friend at a gallery function. A knowing glance at a coworker who asked why Evelyn wasn't with me. Nothing outrageous, just enough seeds so the rumor would spread. I admit, I took satisfaction in the idea of her being confronted by curious or judgmental looks at her workplace or among our circle of friends. A vengeful part of my mind hissed. Let her see how it feels to lose respect. Then on the day we finally met with a lawyer, she showed up alone. We sat in that stuffy conference room, papers on the table, pens lined up in neat rows. The lawyer explained various clauses, asked questions about property and division of assets. I answered in a monotone, my eyes never straying to her face. She barely spoke, offering short nods or one-word answers. When the lawyer asked if we might consider counseling, I almost laughed out loud. I shook my head and said, No, this is final. The lawyer didn't press further. After signing, the official steps were in motion. In the eyes of the law, we were a number of months away from dissolving a decade of marriage. She walked out of the office behind me. On the street, people bustled by, oblivious to our private tragedy. I paused, turning to look at her. Her hair was pulled back in a tidy style, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. The expression on her face was unreadable. In that moment, I remembered the sunlit morning from our early days, the coffee, the gentle smile, the living room flecked with bright shapes of light. That memory now felt like a lifetime ago. She parted her lips, and I waited, thinking maybe, at last, she would try to speak. But no words emerged. She simply turned and walked away. I found a small apartment in the center of the city, near my office. A bland, soulless unit, but it suited me just fine. I slept on a simple mattress, used a folding chair as a desk chair. I ate takeout most nights. The emptiness persisted, an unshakable presence in my chest. My father's old principle, never let them see you weak, had carved me into a statue of composure. Yet behind that sculpture was a man who felt unrecognizable to himself. Weeks went by in a silent procession. My job sustained me, giving me tasks and deadlines to focus on. But at night, I found it impossible to escape my own thoughts. I tried going out with colleagues, tried forcing normalcy, but I always ended up feeling like an actor reading lines for a role I no longer believed in. Then, on a day I should have expected, but still found surprising, Evelyn appeared at my office building. She waited for me in the lobby, perched on a couch near the glass doors. I almost missed her. She wore a simple black coat, hair loose around her shoulders, and her eyes, once warm, looked solemn. When I saw her, I froze momentarily. Something inside me twisted, but I kept my posture straight, chin high. I walked toward her, ignoring the curious glances from a few colleagues. She stood up as I approached, and for the first time in a long while, there was a flicker of emotion on her face, something like regret. I led her outside, to the street. We stood under the awning, cold rain drizzling around us. Cars passed in slow streams of headlights. She reached for my arm, gently, her fingers tentative. I let her touch me, though it felt foreign now. My heart thudded with a quiet ache, the unstoppable reminder of how far we'd fallen. I waited for her to speak, but she said nothing. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if words failed her. I stared at her, at the faint lines of tension around her eyes. She didn't cry, didn't break down. And neither did I. There was only that silent recognition. We were standing among the shattered pieces of what once was. Then, softly, her lips parted again. I thought she might say, "I'm sorry," or "forgive me," but no sound came. The hush of traffic and rain enveloped us. I wanted to say something in that moment, some final statement that would let me walk away with dignity. But all that came out was a hushed exhalation, and I saw that the wedding ring she had once worn was gone from her hand. I nodded once, a small, sharp gesture, acknowledging the truth we both understood. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back to see if she followed. I heard no footsteps behind me, only the hiss of tires on wet pavement. I felt my pulse steadying, my breath returning to a methodical rhythm. In my mind, I recalled the day I first realized I loved her, standing together on a beach in Oregon, sunlight on her hair. That memory, too, was now stained forever. And so, here I am, speaking into this recorder, chronicling the story of how I lost myself, how I destroyed my marriage, or watched it disintegrate, and how the illusions we'd built turned to dust. The world might see me as cold, unfeeling. Maybe that's correct. But inside, I'm just a man who forgot how to cry. I engineered revenge, petty and calculated. I defiled my own moral code. And in the end, it didn't fill the void. It simply confirmed that once love is gone, all that's left is scorched earth. I saw Marco once more, by chance, near a construction site downtown. He was walking with colleagues, gesturing animatedly about some blueprint in his hands. Our eyes met briefly across the street. For a second, he appeared uneasy, perhaps ashamed, or merely surprised. I nodded to him, a short gesture I'm not even sure he recognized. Then we walked our separate ways. I felt nothing. That was, in its own way, terrifying. To feel absolutely nothing where there should have been anger or sorrow. It was as though my heart had turned to stone. I suppose that's the real end of the story. The lawyers did their work, the papers were signed, and the ring that once circled my finger now lies in a drawer. I keep it as a reminder, a cold metal band that weighs hardly anything, yet might as well weigh a ton. A keepsake of the life I no longer live. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my dreams. "Don't touch me," she would say with that hollow neutrality, as if I were just a piece of furniture crowding her space. Other times, I remember that moan behind the hotel door, and my chest tightens in the darkness. I fight the urge to blame myself for everything, telling myself it takes two people to create a chasm this wide. But the truth is, I don't know if there's a point in apportioning blame. It's done. The final pages have been written. Men like me aren't taught how to weep. We're taught to hold it all in. So maybe that's why I'm talking to a machine right now, alone in a near-empty apartment. Because I can't cry, but I can at least let the words spill out, in this measured voice, capturing every detail of my downfall. Maybe that's a form of catharsis. Maybe it's just a way to keep from going insane. In the end, it was never about physical violence or raised fists. It was about quiet, methodical destruction, like a surgeon slicing away at a diseased organ. Except here, the body is my own life. I turned the scalpel inward, convinced that if I cut away enough, I'd finally rid myself of the pain. But all I found was numbness, and that numbness might be scarier than any rage I could have unleashed. Will I recover? I don't know. Time might soften the edges. Maybe one day I'll meet someone else, try again, and find that love isn't always a ticking time bomb. Or maybe I'll remain exactly as I am, a hollow man, going through the motions, unable to take another risk. I suppose the difference between those two paths is a question of choice, and I'm not ready to make that choice yet. I only know that I once had a wife I loved, and she loved me, or at least said she did. Then everything fell apart in the quiet, shadowy corners of our life. That's the story of how I discovered her infidelity, how I matched it with my own, and how we both lost something irreplaceable along the way. It's not an uplifting tale. It's not a neat moral lesson. It's just the truth, unvarnished and final. I'm stopping the recorder now. I need to pack up what remains of my things and move to a new place, sign a new lease, start from scratch. Maybe, in the months or years ahead, I'll listen to this recording again and remember the man I was. Or maybe I'll just delete it, bury the memory. But for now, let it stand as a testament of what betrayal does to a man who once believed in happy endings. I started this story with that memory of her giving me coffee, the sunlight in stripes across our living room floor. I want to end it there, too, because it hurts to think that moment was ever real. The warmth of her body so close to mine, the taste of fresh coffee on her lips when she smiled. If I could go back in time, I'd freeze us both in that instant, forever untainted by what came next. But time is merciless, and illusions never last. We are left with only the facts. And the fact is, some memories are better left to fade. That's all. I'm done.